Must be the Yom HaZikaron.
Okay, we're recording. We ready?
Yep. All right. We are going to start tonight's topic on page 20A, Daf Chaf. So I'm going back a little bit because last week I did just a basic overview of Sotah. So I wanted to go back and focus on something from last week's Daf that we didn't touch upon. So the Mishnah on Daf Chaf, right in the middle, talks about the very controversial topic about the zechus that a Sotah has, right? The Mishnah said that it's possible that if she plays her cards right, she could get a reprieve for a few years, depending on what she has going in her favor, right? So the Mishnah had said that if she learns Torah or she has some kind of zechus, don't worry, we're not going to talk about teaching Torah to women. That's a topic within itself. But toward the end of the Mishnah, right, after the Mishnah said that teach your daughter Torah, it's like teaching her Tiflus. So the Gemara goes on the Mishnah rather goes on a little bit of a tangent and says the following. 2 lines before the end of the Mishnah, it says, Huaya Omer, Chassid Sotah v'Rasha Arum. There are a few types of people that one could look at them as righteous, right? But they're really not. And the classic example is your Chassid Sotah, right? The one who thinks he's so religious, but at the end of the day, he's not, because he does something very silly. Rasha Arum, Gemara discusses what that means. Someone who knows a lot and advises people the wrong way. It's a horrible trait. Then it says Ve'isha Prusha, or a very religious woman. Okay, the Gemara talks about that, obviously. Umakos Perushin. And the next topic and the next category are people who are called Pharisai. Like, for example, there's the Tzedukim, and then there's the Perushim. The Perushim are those who separated from the Tzedukim, the Pharisees, they're called in English. I was about to say parasites. The Pharisees, right, are known as Perushim, and they're what we call religious, but there's something about them that the Gemara says is the opposite. Because of the way they act, they are not religious, but it's the opposite. They leave a lot to be desired. So what are all these 4 types of people or 5 types of people? The Mishnah ends off by saying, Harei hen mivale ola. Very, very strong words. They are people who erode the world. Like there's actually a machlokas, what the gear says, machale means like to destroy. They either blow up the world, they erode the world, they destroy the world, they do something really bad. For example, we're not going to talk about it, but one of these examples, the Mishnah said, is a Isha Prusha. So an Isha Prusha is a woman who's religious, right? Again, the word Purusha means someone who's pious, someone who's religious. But the Gemara says is that what she does is she appears to be religious, and the example is that she knows witchcraft, right? And when she would see someone giving birth, she would do some hocus pocus, and she would stop them from giving birth. And she says, "Oh, let me go pray for you." And she goes to the room and prays, and she reverses the curse, and then she gives birth, and then the lady gives birth. So that's an example of someone who has a power, right? But she wants to impress upon the world how religious she is and what a great prayer and what a great, and what a great tzaddikus she is. And she misinforms people. And she says that because of the prayers that I did, you gave birth. So she takes credit for something that really she shouldn't have. So that's one example. But the words of the Bartanura on Hare Elu Mevale Olam is the Bartanur says that very succinctly. Sherotzim laharos labrios shehem chasidim. Right? What the common denominator is between these four groups of people in the Mishnah is that they want to demonstrate to everyone what great chasidim they are, what great pious people they are. But the truth is, ve'ein tocham kibaram. But their inside is not like their outside. They're all show. Okay, they're fraudsters. That's exactly what these four people, these 4 or 5 groups of people have in common. They may in fact be religious, but for some reason, they want to go overboard. They want to show everyone how great they truly are, and it ends up backfiring because the Mishnah says they actually destroy the world. So I wanted to read the Gemara on Daf Chav Beis. If you skip over, actually one other thing I saw interesting, we talked about a Chassid Sotah. So this is the classic example of the person who's so religious, he sees the woman drowning and he says, oh, I can't look at a woman, and he lets the woman drown, right? Unfortunately, that's always been a historical, negative about what people think of very religious people, that all they do is they care about themselves, and they go and they have a one-track mind, and they don't budge from that. And if they see someone drowning, they wouldn't bother saving them because they may look at a woman in a bathing suit. So we all know that that's silly, but that's what we call a Chassid Sotah. And in fact, I saw the Rambam all the way at the end of Hilchos Erechim V'Charamim says the following line. He says, I'm reading from the Rambam, La'olam al yakdish adam v'lo yachrim kol nechasav. A person should never ever, right? We have a concept, you could give your house hegdish, you could donate something to the Beis HaMikdash, right? You could consecrate items. The Rambam gives you advice, never consecrate, don't give up your house, your whole house, or everything that you own. Right? Don't go overboard. Overall, okay, he brings a pasuk from the end of Parshas Bechukosai that says you should only give what you have, not every single thing that you have. So here it is. The Rambam uses the word shtus, like we use the word today, shtus. The Rambam uses the word shtus as a description of someone who appears to be doing something so good, but it's really shtus. Why? What's the reason that you shouldn't give away all your money? Because he thinks that I'll give away all my money. Maybe he'll give away all of his money. He won't make any back. And then he'll be collecting tzedakah. So obviously we don't want that to happen. So the Rambam is giving you good advice on that. So he's quoting our Mishnah now, the Rambam is, and he's saying that the Chachamim said that a Chassid Sotah destroys the world. The Rambam is bringing down the rule that we've seen a couple of times. We're going to see it in Bava Kama soon. That says that if you give away your money, you can't give more than a fifth. Okay, 20%. Okay, and the Rambam brings a pasuk, and he says, "Afilu bekarbana shadam chayiv behen harei chased Torah mamonim." Right, even the karbanos that you're going to say, "Well, the Torah maybe brings such expensive karbanos." At the end of the day, the bill is so high, right? The truth is, you have to bring what you could only afford. Okay, and he brings the pasuk ish kamat nas yado. So that's the Rambam's explanation of a Chassid Sotah. I want to focus on the last category, right? What the Bartanura called those people who are in Toho Kibaro. So the discussion starts on 22b, Chaf Beis Amud Beis. Right? If you look at Chaf Beis Amud Beis, so in Chaf Beis Amud Beis, the Gemara says the following. on top. Umakos perushin, right? The Mishnah said that there are people who suffer, who for whatever reason, the Mishnah said that when they walk, they end up hitting themselves and hurting themselves because they appear so humble that they walk all distorted and they end up banging into the wall. That's what the Mishnah calls makos perushin. So the Gemara now is going to explain that there's different categories. Let's look at the first 7 categories. I'm all the way on top. Tanu Rabbanan, the second line on top. Shiva perushin. There are 7 types of people who are perushin. They're religious, righteous people, but they're fakers. Okay, let's call them fakers. So who are these fakers? Parush Shichmi, the righteous people of Shechem. Parush Nikpi, the righteous people who hit themselves. Parush Kizai, the people who bloodlet. The people who Parush Meduchia, right? The people who the Gemara is going to explain what that means. And then there's another group who are fakers, who are those Parush Machovasi, the righteous people who say, what is my obligation? Right? Vesena, and I will do it. Parush Me'ahava, Parush Me'ir, those people who are religious only because of love. And then there are people who are religious only because of fear. So the Gemara is saying something very deep over here, that when you see someone who appears to be religious, you always, not always, but you could be skeptical and say, okay, what is the reason? What's the motive for this person? So now we're going to get into an explanation. The first one, as you remember, the people who are fakers, they're called Shichmi. Those are the righteous people of Shechem. Okay, what does Shechem have to do with anything? The Gemara says, those are the people who do the actions of the people who Shechem. What happened in Shechem? The story in Parshas Vayishlach. Remember the story where Dinah was raped and Shimon and Levi came, and he had this whole plan that if you agree to circumcise yourselves, I'll let you intermarry and we'll all live happily ever after, right? And everything will be great. And they fell for the trick. And 3 days after they all circumcised themselves, Shimon and Levi came and wiped out the whole city. And very controversial. Yaakov was very upset. He didn't give them a bracha in Vayechi, as we all know the story. So what kind of people are from Shechem? They circumcised themselves, but there was a catch, only for personal gain. So this is someone who behaves righteously only so that it looks like he gets covered. Someone who does something for an alternative, for an ulterior motive. That's called Shechem. Next is Perish Nikpi Zehaminakef as Raglav. Someone who, when he walks, he injures his feet. Why? Because when he walks, he drags his feet. He wants to appear so humble that his feet end up scraping the ground or banging into the wall. Okay, you might wonder about their mental capacity. But anyways, continuing, the next group is, as Gemara says, Amar of Nachum, Zemak is down Maktalim. Kizai is people who bloodlet, right? By banging their head against the walls, because they walk with their eyes closed because they don't want to see other people, God forbid, dressed immodestly. So they walk around blindfolded. And when you walk around blindfolded, you're going to end up, right, with a lot of medical bills. So that's the story about that category. Harosh Meduchia, people who walk like a pestle, like something that, right, like a mortar and pestle, right? So that's someone who is bent over like, right, like the pestle that grinds into a mortar. Then there's another group of people called Parush Machovasi Vasena, right? Religious people who say, what is my obligation? And I will do it. Now that sounds like a very virtuous midah to have. What's so bad about that? So the Gemara says, Hamal Yusa, it's a great midah. The Gemara says, no. Someone who says, I've accomplished so much, I've done all the mitzvos, I want more mitzvos. I'm a superstar, right? It's like extra credit. Not only did you get 100 on the test, you want another 7 points of extra credit. So we don't like to think that way because, right, we could barely do 613 mitzvos, right? Let alone someone who wants to get extra credit. Okay, so again, you could see all these people may be religious, but they want to wear it outside. They want everybody to know that they're religious, and they go overboard. Then you have these next two groups. Parish me'ahava, the Gemara says parish me'ira. Amrle Abaya v'Rava latana. So Abaya and Rava tell the Tana, lo tisni parish me'ahava parish me'ira. That's not so bad. If someone says, you know what, I'm religious, but you know what, I'm scared that I'm going to get struck down. So therefore, I have no choice but to be religious. Or someone says the opposite. I'm religious because I love it so much. Meaning it's so great for me, I love it. Now you're doing it not because God told you, because you're interested in more of the reward of what you're going to get. Now the Gemara has a big problem with this because the Gemara says, right? Because Rabbi Yehuda, the famous Gemara, it's cited here, it's cited in 3 or 4 other places. We had it last in Sachem, I believe, Daf Nun, that says that what? Even if you, right, this is like the person studying for the Gemara test. Are you studying for the test, or are you studying because it's learning? Well, it would be great if it was Lishma, but we say Mitoch. It's okay to do it Shalol Lishma because eventually it will become Lishma. So therefore, Abaya says, I don't really think that that's a problem to, to do something for an ulterior motive, if at the end of the day, it's going to help you in learning. So you're right, you're not doing it because you feel like learning, you're doing it because you have a test. So the Gemara says, that's not so bad. The Gemara concludes with this interesting statement, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, the matmira metamra, the metamra, what's hidden is in fact hidden, the miglaya megalia, and what is outside to everyone to see, what's revealed is revealed. Beidina Rabba lispara mahani dechafu gunde. But those people, right, who hide behind the cloak, right, God will take payment from them. Right? People who hide. What does that mean, people who hide? We're going to see in a second. Amrla Yanai Malka Lidvisa. So Yanai Malka, there was a king by the name of Yanai. He wasn't famous, he was infamous. There were actually a few Yanais in Shas. This is the one that killed out, if you remember the story in Kiddushin, Daf Samach Vav, I think, it says that he killed out all of the Chachamim. Right? He wasn't a good guy. Right? So he told his wife the following, Al Tisyara min ha-pirushin. There are 2 people who you shouldn't be scared of. Don't be scared of the religious, okay? Now, he didn't obviously like religious people. He killed out all the rabbis. And don't be afraid of those people who aren't Perushin, i.e. the Tzedukim, meaning someone who's to the right, who we know is religious, don't worry about them. And someone to the left who's not religious, don't be worried about them. So who does that leave to be worried about, right? He's getting to a point. So what's his point? His point is very, very deep. Elamin hatzivuin. Who should you be fearful of? The people who are tzivuin, right? From the word color. Shedomin leperushin, shemaseim kamaisa zimri, right? Because these are the people who appear very religious, right? They call this in English a hypocrite, right? From the word, right, from Hippocrates, right? So this hypocrite appears to be religious, and he does the Maisa of Zimri, right? Meaning he did something really, really bad, right? We know the story at the end of Balak with Zimri ben Salu, right, who was the tribe. He was caught with a Midianite woman, and he brought tremendous disgrace, and that's what the whole story of Pinchas was about, right? When he killed Zimri, right? It was a whole uprising, at the end of Parshas Balak, if you remember, beginning of Parshas Pinchas. So these people are wicked. So on the one hand, they're wicked like Zimri, umavakshin schar Pinchas, but they request a reward like Pinchas, right? Who was a zealot, who fought for the honor of God. So that's what Yanai says. You have to be careful from these people. So what do we see? What do we see from the story? So one as the Bartanura says, that all of these things have in common is that these are people that are, like we said, fraudsters, people who fake appearing to be one way, or as he said, tocho kabaro, right? She'ein tocho kabaro, that your inside is not like your outside. So I wanted to, in this year, focus on 3 separate Gemaras, and each Gemara has a little nuance in it that discuss this topic. The first Gemara is a Gemara in Brachos. It's coincidental that the Gemara in Brachos has a story on Daf Chav Ches that's somehow related to today's Daf also, because in today's Daf we started the new Perek, and the Perek brought in the Mishnah said the word Bo Bayom, right? Bo Bayom means on that day, right? On that day they had a certain drasha. So anytime the Gemara says Bo Bayom, right? No, we did that a year and a half ago, Shmuel. So anytime it says Bo Bayom, that is the day that Rabbi Gamliel lost the Nasi, and he was not kicked out, but Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became in charge of the yeshiva. Right? There's a whole story without getting into the details about 2 Talmidim that fought over whether Marav was a Rishus or a Chova, famous story everyone knows on Daf Chav Zayin Brachos. And Rabbi Yeshua got into a fight with Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel got angry. They ended up ousting Rabbi Gamliel, and they had to find a new Rosh Yeshiva. And they agreed it's going to be Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He had what they call Alamailis. He was a Chacham, he was an Ashir, and he was Asir Me'ezri. He had lineage. He had what they call a Git Yichus. So the story goes, I'm reading from Brachos Chav Ches Amud Aleph, very, very famous story, about 7 or 8 lines from the top. This is right after the Gemara says that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah asked his wife, he was appointed, and he says, I look so young, and this is what we say in the Haggadah, Hari Kiven Shivim Shana. That's exactly where this Gemara comes, that's where that line comes from. So he grew his 18 hairs, and great. So, by the way, can people become gray overnight? If you remember, about a month ago, I sent on the chat an article that actually said that could happen. For whatever reason, you could literally turn gray overnight. I don't know if you remember me sending that, but I did. Anyways, so this is what the Gemara says. Tana osu hayom sal kula shomer hapetach. That day, when Rabbi Gamliel left, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the new sheriff in town, so the shomer, right, the person in charge, or what we call today the bouncer, right, who would see who would get to enter into the yeshiva, was removed. And anybody who wanted to go into yeshiva to learn, right, this is our policy, Shmuel, right, from the article. Anyone who wants to come to our yeshiva could learn without any question. What does that mean? Because there was a time when Rabbi Gamliel, right, used to announce, and he said the following: Kol Talmud she'ein tocho kabaro lo yikanos lebeis hamedrash. Whoa, Rabbi Gamliel had a policy. Not everyone could come in. If you could come in, only if you are, as we said a few minutes ago, tocho kabaro. Your inside is like your outside, right? You don't just fake it. You actually say what you mean and mean what you say. That was the entrance exam that Rabbi Gamliel had. Now, okay, Now that Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah was the Rosh Yeshiva, he abolished that. So what do you think happened? So the yeshiva obviously grew, and everybody came in. And the Gemara goes on to say, Ahu Yomi Tosru Kamasalse, they had to bring in so many benches. As a machlokas, did they bring 400 benches? Did they bring 700 benches? Right? Okay, the Gemara ends off by saying, well, Gamliel felt bad. Okay, well, he should have felt bad because he restricted it. So let's just understand one thing. So I heard a great kasha on this. The question is, again, back in when Rabbi Gamliel was in charge, right? He had a policy. You had to be tocho kabaro, right? You had to be sincere and ingenuous. So the question is, how did the bouncer know whether or not the Talmidim were tocho kabaro or not? Right? Who were the shomrim? The shomrim of the Beis Hamikdash of the base of the yeshiva probably weren't learned themselves. So how in the world did they know whether or not the Talmidim were Tocho Kabara or not? It's a great question. So I heard an answer that of course they didn't know. Their job was to relay over the message that there's the quality of a Talmud Chacham. What is the quality of a Talmud Chacham? I'm not going to start asking you questions in Daf Yomi or in Shnai Mikra or the Parsha Shavua. I'm going to ask you one question. The question is, are you Tocho Kabaro? Are you Erlich, as they say? And if you needed to work on it because you weren't, right, then the Beis Medrash was the place to go. Because learning is the elixir for all of your Tocho Kabaro issues, right? If you're not what you say, right, and if you don't mean what you say and you say what you mean and you're two different people, then that's exactly why you had to go into the Beis Medrash. So that's a nice way of explaining what exactly was going on over here. Now, I have a better question, though. The question is, again, you went from Rabbi Gamliel to Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. So I found actually there is a siman in the Shulchan Aruch in the Yoreh Deah about Hilchos Talmud Torah. All right, the Aruch HaShulchan has a commentary on it. Let's look at the Aruch HaShulchan on Yoreh Deah, Reish Mem Vav 246. So here's what he says. He says, it talks about Kol Talmud, Kol Shon Talmud Shenu Hagun. It says if you teach someone that's not worthy, that's not there yet, it's like Zorik Evan Lamarkelos. And he goes on to say, he says, I have a question. I have a question on the story of Rabbi Gamliel. Shahaya Machris. Well, again, before Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Gamliel was in charge. He said, Kol Talmud Chacham, Shein Tocha Kabar, Al Yikanos Beis HaMedrash. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah lo asa ken. Right? Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah didn't do that. Umavur Sham de Rabbi Gamliel lav shaper of it. And the whole, learning this whole Gemara in Brachos, your impression is that Rabbi Gamliel was in the wrong. Right? So, and behold, like the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. Right? Now, what does Tocha Kabaru mean? Tocha Kabaru is someone who's a fake, i.e., someone who, as he says, someone who could do one thing inside and do something outside and be a complete fraud, you would probably say lacks Yira Shamayim. He says the problem is we have a Gemara in Yuma, Daf Ayin Beis. Let's look at the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Ayin Beis. Gemara says, let me open it up. Gemara in Yuma Ayin Beis says the following. The pasuk says in Parshas Truma, "Vasisa lacha aron vasu aron atzei shitim." Right. This is the commandment to build the aron, and it says at the end of the pasuk, it talks about it was in gold, and it says mibayis umichutz titzapena. Right, from the outside, right. It should be gold from within, and from without, it should be covered with gold. So what do we learn from within and without. Oh, sounds familiar. This, we could relate this to a person. Amar Rava, kol Talmud Chacham she'ein tocho kabaro, eino Talmud Chacham. A person is not considered Talmud Chacham if he is just insincere, if he's not tocho kabaro. Amar Abaya, nikra nitav. Not only that, he's called nitav. He's called loathsome. It's called disgusting. And he brings a pasuk shenemar afki nitav v'nelach ishota mayim ablo. Okay, it's not a good thing. So the Gemara obviously goes on to say so many negative things, right, about someone who is not tocho kabaro. So getting back to the question of the Aruch HaShulchan, v'harei vadahu eno hagun, right? So this is obviously someone who's not fit. So what is Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah doing? He's saying that that's it. There's no more rules. Anyone who wants to come in could come in, and that's it. Like, what kind of policy is that? Someone who's not tocho kabaro is someone who the Gemara says has no yira shamayim. So what kind of policy is Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah instituting that contradicts this basic tenet that we have? So the Aruch HaShulchan answers the following. He says, "V'tzarich lomar deha'inyan kenu dahatam she'ein malam d'leinu hagun." Do you know why, as we just said before, that you can't teach someone who's not hagun, who's not tocha kabaro, mishum dilimot shelo lishma, because he's going to learn it in a bad way, right? He's going to learn it shelo lishma, and even though we know that that la'olam yilmod af shelo lishma shemitoch shelo lishma bal lishma, but the truth is that Tosfos in Psachim, he brings down, asks the same question, because Tosfos in Psachim says we have this discussion about mitoch, shelo lishma bal lishma. Then we have a statement that says, halom et shelo lishma noach lo shelo nivra. Someone who learns for the wrong reason, better he not even be born. That goes to show you how rejected his learning is, of what kind of person this is. So the Tosfos over there answers, well, there's two different types. The chilko bein lomet shelo lishma ela l'shem ezeh pniya, the bezeh yoter the b'meshach hazman yavo lishma. If he's learning for a certain reason, just not for that, then it's okay. Ubein halomud lakanter. What if someone learns so that he could deceive people? He wants to learn so that he could always debate and win the debate, right? He has no intent of learning lishma. He wants to be educated, right? So he could keep up in a debate. That's the wrong type. The bazeh, the Aruch HaShulchan says, noach lo shelo nivra. That person is worthy of not being created. So v'tzarach lomer gam kan here. So therefore, in our story, Maseches Brachos, the zeh she'ein tocha kabar yachol hiya sheyolmod l'shum ezeh pniya. He just, whatever, he's learning for a different reason. The Talmud she'ein hagun hu alomid lakanter, but if you're learning just to trick people, that is a different story, and that's the ultimate level of someone who can't be put in. So he reinterprets this Gemara and Brachos as not that you could just go in, right? It's just if you just didn't have the proper kavanah yet, you learned, but you didn't know what you were learning for, right? It wasn't lishma. But if it was l'shem l'kanter, just to deceive other people, then that would be the real lowest, and that even Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah wouldn't let in. So that's how he explains. That's how he explains the answer. So we've seen the Gemara in Brachos that talks about tocha kabaro. We've seen the Gemara in Yuma that talks about also kol Talmud Chacham, right? Shein tocha kabaro. They learn it from the pasuk mibayichu mechutz titzapena. There are other sources. I want to look at another source. It's actually interesting regarding in Parshas Tetzaveh. One of the commandments is v'lo yizach hachoshen me'al ha'ephod, right? The choshen and the ephod. So the Gemara elsewhere says that you're not allowed to remove the breastplate from the ephod, from the tunic that the Kohen wore, and that also symbolizes this concept, because the choshen is always by the heart, and the ephod represents, the Gemara in Zvachim says it represents speech. So speech and the heart always have to be in line and aligned with one another. So that's another interesting source that the Gemara has. I want to focus on something that appears to be unrelated. We had it a couple of weeks ago in Parsha Shmini. The pasuk says regarding the kosher animals. Okay, the Torah gives simanim. It says you have to, in order to be a kosher animal, the animal has to chew its cud, and it has to have split hoofs. So the Gemara, the pasuk says achezel lo tochlu mima'alei hagera u'mifasei haparsa. So the following, I'm going to give you a list of those animals that either chew their cud or have split hooves, and there are 4 animals: esagamal, the camel, kimala gerahu, because it does chew its cud, ufarsa einenu mafris tamehu lachem, but it doesn't have split hooves, it's tameh to you. That's the camel. Then you have the shafan. We don't really know what the shafan is, some kind of rabbit, right? The shafan, the hare, kimale gerahu, because again, it chews its cud, ufarsa lo yafris, it doesn't have split hooves, tamehu lachem. Then you have the arneves, right? Also another rabbit-like animal, kimala gerahu, farsa lo hifrisa. Again, the same story, tamehu lachem. Then you have the chazir, the 4th animal, that has one of the simanim, kimafris parsahu. On the one hand, right? On the one hand, it has split hooves. V'shosat shesa parsahu geira lo yigar. The problem is it doesn't chew its cud, so therefore it's tamehu lachem. Okay, so we have 4 animals, and the Torah goes into detail why exactly they're not kosher. There's a fascinating kliyakar that points out something very subtle. Says the kliyakar, esagamal kimala gerahu. It's bringing down the camel. Let's start back with the camel. The camel isn't kosher. Now, what does the Torah say first? It says the camel isn't kosher because it chews its cud and doesn't have split hooves. But it first says the reason why it could be kosher. Got that? So that's what the kliyakar says. He says, why does the Torah first talk about the chewing the cud part? That part is okay. The Torah should stress that what? That it doesn't have split hooves. So the kliyakar says, that's the whole reason why it's not kosher, is because of the hooves, right? And the same is true by the shafan and the arneves. Those 3 animals have in common that they're quote unquote half kosher, but the Torah starts off by saying they do split their hooves. And guess what it says by the chazir? The chazir, which has the reverse problem, says the kliyakar, ubechazir amar ki mafris parsahu, right? The Torah should start off by saying, right? You know why the chazir isn't kosher? Because it doesn't chew its cud. What does it say by the chazir? It's not kosher, but by the chazir it says ki mafris parsahu, that it does split its hooves, but it happens not to chew its cud. So for all 4 animals, the Torah opts to describe the kosher sign, and then it says the non-kosher sign. So he wants to know, what's the reason? So here's the answer of the kliyakar. It's a very profound statement. He says the following: Ubiyar inyan zeh shesiman tahara shebekulan mosif tuma al tumasan. Very deep word, the kliyakar. We call it the kliyakar a lot. We haven't done it in a few weeks, but whenever he says something, it's very, very deep and profound. He says the truth is that the siman tahara that it has is mosif tuma. It makes it even worse. He uses the word mosif tuma al tumasan. It makes it worse. Just like the way they say in Bereshis Rabbah regarding Esav, shenim shalachazir, Esav is compared to the pig. Why is he compared to the pig? because what is a pig? Sheposhet es tlafav, because the pig shows its hooves. Lahara ki'ilu kasher. Hey, look, I'm kosher. Look at my hooves. V'tocho male toch, v'tocha male toch umirma. But inside, he's not kosher. Inside, he's deceiving you. He's tricking you. Okay, where do we see that? So the Medrash Rabbah quotes it. We also know that from the Rashi in Parshas Toldos. Let's look in Parshas Toldos for a second. Let's put a bookmark on that. Rashi in Toldos, the pasuk says, "Vayihi Esav ben arba'im shana vayikach isha es Yehudis bas be'eri achiti ves basmas bas elon achiti." The pasuk right before the chapter where Yitzchak gives the brachos, says the following: after the story when they were born and he sold the Bechorah, so it says Esav was 40 years old and he married two women. One was named Yehudis and one was named Basmas. Says Rashi, Ben Arba'im Shana. Why did the Torah talk about the fact that Esav was 40 years old? Why do we care? Not only why do we care, as the Mefarshim say, why does the Torah tell us how old Esav was? The Torah doesn't tell us how old other people were when they got married. What does the Torah want us to know with this information? So says Rashi, Esav haya nimshal l'chazer. Esav is compared to the pig. Shenemar, the pasuk in Tehillim says, Yecharsmena chazir miya'ar. The pig from the wood, from the ya'ar, right, from the forest, ravages it. Hachazir hazeh shu kishu shochev. When this pig is lying down, poshet plafav, it stretches out its hooves. Lo mera'ush ani tahor. Look, I'm kosher. Look at me. Kach elu gozlim v'chomsun umaran asam kasherim. So too, there are these people who were with Esav, and Esav himself, they rob and they plunder people and they pretend that they're honorable. Why? What does that have to do with being 40? So Rashi concludes by saying, Kol mem shana shahaya Esav tzad nashim mitachas ba'aleinu ma'ano son. Right? 40 years, Esav, what was his claim to fame? He was into Gilu Arayas, into Shichas Damim, he killed, he did all kinds of bad things and nasty things. And one of the things was he would take women from their men, right? And he would rape them. All of a sudden, he turns 40, he goes, Shahaya ben Mem, Abba ben Mem Shana Nasa Isha Afaniken. He says, my father got married at 40. I'm going to show my father that right? Rashi elsewhere says that he did kibbud ava aim. That was the one thing Esav had going for him, right? But he would make up, right? He would show off to his father, ask him all kinds of klutz kashas about, right? What does it say? Whether you could take meiser from salt or not. He wanted to impress his father, but deep down he didn't really know anything, right? So he wanted to show his father, look, Daddy, I want to be like you. You got married when you were 40, so I'm going to follow in your footsteps. Aren't I a great guy? And he completely pulled the wool over Yitzchak's eyes. Well, whether he did or not is a separate discussion. Whether Yitzchak knew all this or not, that's a very heated debate amongst the scholars. Not to get into that, but the bottom line is this is the Rashi that the Kli Yakar is talking about. So that's what he refers to over here by the pig. He says because the pig is half kosher, he's showing you his outside. He's showing you those hooves that are split. And then the Kli Yakar goes on to say, V'zeh mora, he goes on to say further, not only that, V'zeh mora al kol mi she'ein tocho kabaro. This is on all these people who are disingenuous. Kamidas hatzivoim, right? Like we had in Sotah, right? Remember Gemara Chav Beis a few minutes ago? Ha'amarim es atzim kesherim. They appear to be all gracious and slick and kosher. V'hema b'li safik geruin min ha'gamur. But they are even worse than a Rasha Gamur. Shetocha ubaro shavin l'ra. Because at least a Rasha Gamur doesn't hide, right? All the Rashaim we had, right? Yeravam ben Navat and all these Rashaim, they had one thing in common. They didn't pretend to be good people, right? That's at least one thing. And he brings in a Rashi that everyone should know. Ukamosha pirish Rashi al pasuk v'lo yachlu dabro l'shalom. What's the Kli Yakar referring to in that Rashi? So if you remember in the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, right, when everything started good, right, Tonas Pasim, it all went downhill. What does the pasuk say? The brothers became jealous of Yosef. Vayur echab ki oso ahav aviha mikol achav vayisneu oso. Right? The father loved him more than all the brothers, and the brothers hated him. V'lo yachlu dabro l'shalom. Four very important words. They hated him. They couldn't even speak a nice word, right, to him. What does that mean? Says Rashi, V'lo yachlu dabro l'shalom. So Rashi is the optimist here. He says, Mitoch ginosam lamadnu shivcham. From their discredit, from their genus, right, from their genai, from their negativity, at least we could infer something positive to their credits, right? Everything seems so bad over here. Rashi says there's one thing at least valuable that you could take from this. What's to the brothers' credit? That at least they didn't say one thing, right, and show something else. Meaning they stuck to their guns and they didn't even want to talk to him. They didn't sweet talk him in front of Yaakov and then behind Yaakov's back want to kill him, right? Plan to kill him. They said, we don't like you and we're going to show you that we don't like you, right? Like today, there are nations, there are people, there are all kinds of people out there, enemies, bad people, right? At least we know that they don't want us to live, right? So that's what Rashi is saying here. Even the brothers, right? As bad as it was, at least, I mean, this is a very important at least over here. He says, at least they were honest in their enmity and their hatred to Yosef. This is a very, very important point that you could just overlook. It stresses to you, even if you're the worst person and you're a Rasha Gamor, just be honest about it. Don't be half like Esav, who said one thing to Yaakov, to his father Yitzchak, and did something else. And that's why the Kli Yakar is harping back on this point about being echad b'peh, ve'echad b'alev. So the Kli Yakar ends off by saying, V'akorchach hafrasat parsa b'chazir hu siman tumah. That's why the chazir, the hooves, the Torah says, I'm telling you first that the chazir is not a kosher animal. And the first reason is because it has split hooves. That's why the Torah first talks about the siman that's kosher, and then it talks about the siman that's not kosher. He could fool people. Kosher, right? Right? And the same is true with the other three that have the opposite problem, right? The Torah starts off by saying that they do chew their cud, but they want to fool you also. Now, here, Kli Yakar asks a very brilliant question that we should all be wondering. He says, he says, hold on a second. These are animals at the end of the day. So we're comparing this, we're taking this theme and we're putting it to humans. But really, at the end of the day, these animals, there's nothing wrong with a pig, right? When you see a pig, does it claim to be kosher, right? There's nothing wrong with a camel. Camels are very helpful, right? If you ever go to Saudi Arabia, right, that's going to be the animal of choice. There's nothing wrong with it just because it's half kosher, which the Kli Yakar says is worse than being 100% kosher, but they have a tachlis in the world. So what do you want from the poor animal, right? It's not telling you anything. It's not saying I'm half kosher, eat me. So answers the Kli Yakar, mikomakom hem molidim tichuna ra'ah zu beguf ha'ochlam. There's something spiritually bad about them, about anyone who eats them, kikol ochlam yeshamu, because if you eat them, it's not kosher. So correct, there's nothing wrong per se about the animal. The animal could go to Olam Haba, if there is an Olam Haba for animals. The animal didn't do anything wrong. It's just that this characteristic makes them unkosher for human consumption. Right? He says, because they become what we call tzivuim. right? Those colored people who hamar misatzum kesherim kamo esav v'chaveru, like the Gemara in Sotah that we discussed, that they want to fake people, right, to make them think that they're all high and mighty, but at the end of the day, they're just fraud. So I thought that was very interesting. So let's talk about the chazir for a minute, because we bought this kliyakar. So I saw there's a nice statement from the Bat Ayin. The Bat Ayin of Avram Dov of Avrich. The rabbi of Tzfat, he lived in Tveria in Eretz Yisrael. He has a mystical book based on probably the Zohar or something. I saw a line from him. Let me open it up. He says the following. We just quoted the pasuk in Shmini that talks about the pig, right? It says, "V'hu geira lo yigar." So he brings down, if you look in the Orach Chaim in Parsha Shmini, Orach Chaim says, "Tanai hu bedavar, kol zman shehu lo yigar." It's kosher as long as it what? As long as it doesn't chew its cud. Avalasad lavo ya'ala geira v'yachzor lihios muter. This is a very famous discussion about, are things going to change in the time of the Mashiach? And one of the examples people give is this Orach Chaim that says, well, the reason why the chazir is called a chazir comes from the word choser, because it will return to being kosher. What's going to happen? So the question is it going to chew its cud, or is it going to be kosher? So that goes into the whole discussion. We're not going to talk about it now. Is his nature going to be different in Lasid Lavo, right? In the times of Mashiach? We don't know. But this Orach Chaim says that the pig will eventually chew its cud, and that's why it's called the chazir. He says that look at this chazir. It's a faker. It shows that it's kosher. Says the Bat Ayin, there are people who are smooth talkers, right? We know about people like this today. Right? They appear very fine and nice, and they talk nicely. Echshu ohavam, they have lots of friends. Avolibo balimahim, but their heart is disconnected. It's not in the right place. V'hu bechinat chazir, that's exactly like our classic chazir. Shemara bechitzonia shalo lifnim shehu tov v'kasher mafriz parsa. It says, look, I'm kosher. But aval geira lo yigar hainu bechinat pnimiyat shelo belev v'nefesh eno ken eluhu sono. Okay, he brings one more statement I found interesting. V'zehu ikav hageula. He says this is why Mashiach hasn't come yet. She'ein ben David ba ad sheyitahar hachazir. Until the chazir becomes kosher, that's when you know Mashiach is going to come. Hainu sheyala geira via pnimiyos libo kamo shemareu b'tlafav. When people start acting on the outside. On the inside, like they're outside. They're straight as an arrow. Right. That is the bechina of emes, and very, very beautiful thought to almost end on. But
so
yes.
So if we have signs that the Mashiach is going, if we have signs that the Mashiach is going to come, like this one or whatever, then how is that? How is there something that people could argue about or whatever if this is a sign of the Mashiach?
Someone was going to ask me that, and it had to be you.
Okay.
I don't know. It's hard to understand. It's more important to know what you could get out of this. Meaning, forget the Mashiach part, because this is beyond our wavelength. The question is, what do you get out of this? That's the way I want to look at it. Okay. What does everybody get out of these things? I think that's more important than talking about Mashiach, in my humble opinion, because it's just, there are too many contradictory chazals about Mashiach, and it's going to be either great, it's going to be horrible, right? And I think today is more on the horrible side than it is on the great side, but we're not there yet. We got to be more horrible. But anyways, there's a lot, we'll talk. I wanted to end off, we're talking about the chazir. I wanted to show you a fascinating Gemara in Maseches Chulin Daf Nun Tes, one of my favorites. V'amar Rav Chisda, says Rav Chisda, Hay mahalach b'derech v'nimtze behema Shepia gamum, it says if you're walking and you found an animal whose mouth was mutilated, right? And you couldn't tell what kind of animal it is, you look at the hooves, as long as you know that it's not, as long as you know what a chazir looks like, and if it's not a chazir, then we know that you could eat it. So the Gemara says, Lav Amr Chazir Ika Chazir, didn't you say that there's a pig which has split hooves, right? And still not kosher. So maybe Ika Mina Achrina, the Damich, maybe there's another animal that is similar to the Chazir. So maybe it's not kosher. Why are you saying that the Chazir is the only animal that is what we call half kosher by having split hooves? Says the Gemara, Lo Salkadaitach the Tanah be Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Shmuel says, "Es chazir ki mafriz parsa." The pasuk says, "And the chazir," because this is the one, like the Kliyakar just said, that has split hooves. Says the Gemara, "Shalit ba'olamo yodea." God knows she'ein l'chadavar shemafriz parsa v'tamei ela chazir. That the pig is the only specimen alive on planet Earth that has this characteristic of split hooves, right? But doesn't chew its cud. It's only the chazir lefichak prat bo hakasavhu. That's why the verse singles it out by saying the word ki mafris parsa hu. This animal is the only animal that exists that has split hooves and doesn't chew its cud. So it's a very the word that the Gemara uses. So how is God called? It says Hashem. It says Ribona Shel Olam. Right? Hakadosh Baruch Hu. There's all kinds of adjectives for God. It's a very rare adjective to use the word shalit ba'olamo. Shalit ba'olamo literally means one who rules the world, right? A shalit, like a shilton, right? Like a ruler of a country. So it's a very strange application of an adjective for God's name to be put and talking about the fact that the pig has split hooves. So there is one of my top 3 Maratz Chayes is in all of Shas, is located right here. The Maratz Chayes he was born in the Ukraine, he lived in Poland, he lived from 1805 to 1855. It's very important to note where he lived and when he lived, because I'm going to read you the Maratz Chayes and why he thinks that Shalit Ba'olamo, that God being the ruler, was appropriate for this statement. I want to read every word of this Maratz Chayes, okay? Even if I go overtime. Shalit Ba'olamo Yodea, he was born in Lviv, right? That's when the border of Poland and Ukraine kept on changing. A little bit like today. Shalit ba'olamo yodea she'en lecha davar ma legera ela gama lefichach parda kasav. Hakavana shehatorah nitna b'zeh simanim shehi min hashamayim. So the Gemara says that there's something special about these simanim. These simanim that these animals have is some kind of divine reference, that the Torah is from the Shamayim. How do you know that the Torah is from the Shamayim? How do you know that the Torah is divine? From learning about the camel and the pig. Look at the words he uses. There are people who discover, chakira means to investigate. There are people who investigate b'chol matmonis hateva, in all of nature, biologists and anthropologists and all people who study civilizations and nature and science, hateva, umotzim b'chol eitz, and they find all the times new specimens in trees, b'medinos chadashos, brios gedolos, b'chayos nifrados. There are always new animals, right, and species that are discovered, right? Last year in Vietnam, they discovered something or other. I remember seeing in the news, some kind of species of caterpillars that were never discovered. B'chayos nifrados ashelo no dula kadmonim, that the previous generation never knew about. Uv'chol zos, and even this is him saying in the 1820s, 1830s in Ukraine. He says every single generation has scientists that discover new species, but nevertheless, lo matzu od behema or chaya ashetia malagera, they have never found one animal in the history that chews its cud, right? Levad zulas hagamal, except for the camel. Umafresed parsa levad zulat hachazir. You could search the whole world and you'll never find a half kosher animal more than what the Torah says. 3 half kosher one way and 1 half kosher the other way. You could look and never find it, except for the chazir and the gamal. Ulefichach prat hakasuv. That's what the Torah means. That's what the Gemara says when it says who. It says, I'm teaching you this. Lahodia sharak hu ashalit ba'olamo. The only one who could know the secret is the only one who rules the world. That's what the word rules mean. He made these rules for the world. He set up the world. And in God's rule, he ruled for whatever reason that there are only going to be 4 animals like this in existence. Right? Hu ashalit ba'olamo v'yadea kol yitzorav. He knows all the creations. Sharak elu hamufurashim betorah levad hema ba'alei siman achad v'lo yoter. He says the only way to explain this is that God must have a hand in this. A person, if you were to write the Torah, would never go out on a limb to say there are 4 animals that I know of that are half kosher. A person would never sign his name on a book and make some kind of guarantee, right, saying that there are only 3 half animals. There are only 3 half animals that are kosher like this, and 3 half kosher and 1 half kosher animal like that. V'zeh emes. He says, and this is the truth, and there's no doubt about it. That's why the Gemara, in describing this, uses the word shalit, the ruler, because it was God, for whatever reason, right, decreed the laws of nature, and that's a proof, as the Maharatz Chai said, that Torah is min hashamayim, because there's no other way to explain this kind of guarantee. And on that note, any questions? No. All right. George ought to love this one. Okay.